I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and things are heating up in the NBA playoffs as we have 4 great series going on with, I'm going to be honest, I think every single team thinks they have a legitimate chance to win, and they could all be right. We'll get back on track for sure after a 1-3 ATS record on the last pod with some NBA picks for every game coming up in the next series, as we're still clicking at 41, 25, and 1 overall for my NBA picks on the pod. 2 more games to go as each series is super interesting. The Heat and Sixers now tied at 2. Mentioned Joel Embiid making his triumphant return. And in these series, as mentioned, the Warriors and Grizzlies was the only game I got right. Boston at least was a close cover for the Bucks than for me picking the Bucks in that one. I'll be honest with you guys. I was way off on the Heat and Sixers series, as well as the Mavs and Suns series. And it's very interesting, right? Joel Embiid makes his triumphant return. We talked about how Joel Embiid might be one to be playing up said injuries, right? We did kind of talk about that, his ability to come back, get hyped up from the crowd. And he did that. Game 3 was a 20-point blowout. Game 4 was a lot closer. And I look at this series and think about how much has changed since Joel Embiid comes back. He comes back. Kyle Lowry is out there limping around, and I don't know how much he's actually helping the Heat in game 4 as he was limping around and missing every single shot he took. I look at this game though, and as I look at game 4, because game 4 is probably more indicative of what reality could be, like best case scenario for the Sixers. Game 3, I think, was just a blowout. Embiid's back. Cool. We're hyped. We're happy. Cool. Game 4, though, was really close. And I'll say this, and I'm tiptoeing around how I say this, because we'll get into this with the next game as well. When people say they don't like watching the NBA, I really understand what they're talking about, because there are just plays in the NBA where you're just like, yo, man, what are the refs on right now? Like, Embiid is getting foul calls, like Bam's getting foul calls on him when he's just like battling for position with Embiid. And it's like, what do you want him to do? Right? Like they're literally just battling for position, and you could call that every single time down the floor, unless you're just going to let Embiid get the ball wherever he wants, but they're whistling fouls. And every time in game 4, when you watch that game and the Heat were pushing and pushing and pushing, credit where credit's due, Harden just got fouled and got to the line and got free throws. If I'm a Sixers fan, happy to see James Harden finally, show some signs of, hey, I'm that guy, or I'm at least a guy. But those guys were getting a bunch of calls, and it really was big. And it's a thing that me and you have talked about a lot. The road team, what happens with their role players on the road. I mean, Miami shot 7 for 30 from 3 in game 3, 7 for 35 from 3 in game 4.
Right.
That's not going to cut it. I expect that to flip going back to Miami, and Miami in game 5, Heat favored by 3.5 points. You know me, I'm not the one to be swayed too much by the roller coaster of a playoff series. I can admit when I'm wrong, and the series is now tied at 2. I said I didn't see the series going past 5. We're obviously going past 5, and I'm on Miami in game 5, Heat minus 3.5. There's not much that I've seen in this series that is going to like drastically change my opinion on things. I just think, on the road, the Embiid, and we've seen this, Embiid and Harden aren't going to get the same calls on the road that they did at home. And Miami's role players aren't going to shoot as terribly on the road as they did. So we're talking game 5, give me Heat minus 3.5.
I mean, some people would call it stubborn. You're like, I'm not going to be swayed. I was like, some people call it. We talked about this.
Swayed by James Harden. Like,
I know,
come on. I'm too familiar with James Harden's work to be fooled by 1 30-point game, and the whole internet's going crazy because my guy dropped 30 once in the playoffs. Come on, bro.
I get it. Plus 600 though was looking pretty good, right? Plus 600 is looking pretty good right now. You can do stuff with if you're holding that plus 600 ticket that I talked about last week on the Sixers, right? You can make some moves as this series is now, tightened right up from a money line standpoint. -3.5. Okay, let's do some quick, point spread analysis here, right? First and foremost, was 7.5 without Joel Embiid. It's 3.5 now. That's a 4-point adjustment. You go, okay. We just compare it to Morant. We compare it to Doncic in the last round, right? Where we sort of talked about how 5 to 5.5 points for even the most like ardent, most important guy. Joel Embiid feels really important because the drop off to whoever is playing when Joel Embiid is not in the lineup, because Doc Rivers is so committed to like the idea of like, this is my 5-man. And like, I am playing this player because he is on my bench. I'm playing DeAndre Jordan because like, I need somebody who is going to look like Joel Embiid, at least from a physicality standpoint, right? He's not going outside the box and going like, I'm going to go really small and see what happens. He's like, no, I'm just still going to put a big man out there. And so the difference is pronounced a lot more because there isn't a way to sort of make up the ground, right? Somehow the only way to make up the ground for Doc Rivers is to literally get Joel Embiid back in the lineup. And so, the game 3, especially with Embiid coming back, was like predictable as far as the Sixers going to be able to win that game. We talked about the idea like, okay, this line is toggling back and forth because nobody knows whether he's going to play or not. The tricky one was buying back in for game 4, knowing that, okay, like we see all the time, the gentleman's sweep, the one game often happens at home in game 3. Game 4 was the one that was always going to be the trickiest one. And so I tweeted, the game picks out yesterday for hockey and basketball. And I had Philly yesterday, and it was like, and it's because I think these two teams, when Embiid is healthy and playing, and I'm not even saying like 100%, I just think these two teams are really equal. And so first and foremost, you have to look when teams are relatively equal or are dead equal. These lines are going to be -3 on either side, right? Like that's the home court advantage. And you saw it -2 for Philadelphia because the concept was that the Heat are the better team. And so, it's basically a point better. Philly wins both those games and we come back to Miami. And now it's down to, okay, I guess Miami's only a half point better than Philadelphia. I just look at it and I go, yeah, I agree with that now. Had we had these full roster teams, and that includes Kyle Lowry, that includes, Embiid, and if everybody was healthy, it goes back to the regular season where you had all of these teams jockeying for the 1 through 4, 1 through 5 positions. If you sort of include the Nets conceptually in that, all these teams are kind of equal. Like we saw this throughout the regular season, right? We had to sell ourselves on the Boston Celtics. And then all of a sudden, like they're the favorites to like make it out of the East about halfway through this playoff so far. And so I kind of just want to take the points if you're giving me anything more than 3.5 when any of these 4 teams in the East are playing against each other, right? Like the reason we're taking the favorite, I shouldn't say the reason, but like one of the ways that we're allowing ourselves to take the favorite with Milwaukee is because we're down to -1 in this situation. As much as we think that Milwaukee should have won that game relatively comfortably, if I had to do it over again, like these teams just gravitate to sort of equality. And we saw that in the first halves of those games in Miami. And I just think with Embiid in the lineup, that first half can become the full game because you're getting 36 minutes out of an actual center that should be playing in the NBA. And not just that, but an MVP candidate. And so like, I don't like Joel Embiid any more than you do. I don't like the Sixers team or Harden any more than you do. But if you're going to give me the 3.5 points, like I could see Philadelphia going in to Miami and winning that game, because we saw them play well enough in a small sample size that I think because of getting the minutes out of Embiid now that you're going to get, I think you can extrapolate that out to a potentially close game. And in this situation, I don't know that 4 points is enough of a flip for Joel Embiid. Like, I just think that he's probably more valuable than that because of what DeAndre Jordan is going to give you, what Paul Millsap is going to have to give you for 48 minutes. And it wouldn't be as valuable. Maybe he'd be 4, maybe he'd be 3, maybe he'd be 2 points, except for like Doc Rivers is totally handcuffed by himself, right? On not being able to make adjustments to cut into that issue. He's not. The good news is he's got his guy back. Again, road game. I'm not really all that afraid of the Miami crowd or that atmosphere in Miami. I'm leaning to the plus 3.5 here because, again, it might be a half point, might even be a point of value. That's still something, right? That's still something for me. And I think I have to go that direction.
I think the home court goes like, I know the normal way we look at it is like, okay, well, is Philly going to be afraid to play in Miami? No, of course not. But I think the Miami dudes like Tyler Hero, nowhere to be found in front of that Philly crowd, right?
Yeah.
Things become a lot nicer in Miami on South Beach if your name's Tyler Hero, right? And your big coming out party was in the bubble, right? During the playoffs. Right. The confines of playing in Miami might be a little bit better. Sorry.
Well, but the gap there, right, is they need to go from getting blown out in game 3 to 10-point loss essentially in game 4 to like their requirement is to go from that, play better, and win, right? And our request by betting them minus 3.5 is to go from blowout 10-point loss to win relatively comfortably, right? Like they have to surpass even their own goals in this case. Whereas with like a Boston, Milwaukee, when we reference it, the goal is literally just to win because the spread is -1, right? And it'll go back to Boston. And this is such, I mean, I keep going back to it because I think it's still the most interesting series. If Milwaukee's -1 here, think about the 6-point flip. Does that mean Boston's gonna be -5 in game 5? Like, I just don't see how that's going to be the case. Like, I think that series has sort of devolved to a point where they're like, you know what? It's kind of like -1, -2 on both sides. And the home court advantage in Boston, Milwaukee has tightened up where it's like maybe a 2-point flip on either side. And I just think that probably should be a plus in Miami, where instead of flipping home court 3 points, either way, we should get to a point where honestly either team who's at home should be favored by 2. It should be really just a bucket. And so again, I just think there's probably a point worth of value here still, because we're in our mind's eye, we're thinking of the Philadelphia team that went to Miami in the first 2 games and wasn't all that competitive in the second half. But this is different, right? And we can get into like a momentum conversation too, but like at least Philly believes now, right? There's some belief element to this team.
Yeah. And there's a way that points get shifted from one place to the next, right? Like I don't expect Joel Embiid to shoot the same amount of free throws as field goal attempts on the road as he does at home. Yeah. Right. Like those guys he gets a lot of shots. He gets a lot, right? But there's just spiciness, we'll say, that happens in the NBA from time to time. And Embiid and Harden did their job, right? They got to the line. They got, and it's a really important thing in the NBA that gets done from vets. And you saw Harden do it a bunch in that game where the game is getting tight. The game is getting close. The comeback is on. How do I get to the free throw line to like stop the run? Miami cuts it to like 4. Harden's just barreling in and he's not trying to score. He's trying to get to the free throw line. And that's just, smart playoff basketball. Yeah. Credit where credit's due to Harden and Embiid. Very interested to see how that game 5 goes for sure.